And we are live.
Well, this meeting will now come to order. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year to you all, and welcome to the January 10th, 2022 meeting of the City of Asheville Noise Advisory Board. My name is Grania Miser. I'm the interim noise administrator and a non-voting member of the board. Later in the meeting, we will discuss the chair and vice chair nominations. And so as last time, in the meantime, I will introduce each agenda item and facilitate the meeting so everybody can follow along, including our audience who may be tuning in through the virtual hub. All committee members today and all staff members are participating virtually again due to the ongoing pandemic. We're streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website.
Grania, just hold one moment. For some reason, the live stream is being funky.
Okay.
Okay, we should be okay now.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So we are streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front of the City of Asheville website and also on the Noise Advisory Board page. For those of you who are joining us that way, welcome today also to you. I'm just going to go ahead and do a roll call. All of us are obviously attending virtually today, so if you can keep your microphone on mute if you're not speaking, and when you have a question or would like to speak, you can unmute your microphone at that point. Board members, if you wouldn't mind, as I call your name, if you could please acknowledge your presence. Everybody okay? So,
yes.
Charles Beck?
Here.
Rick Freeman?
Here.
Corbin Harwood?
Here.
Anoop Christian? I don't think Anoop is here, right? Okay. Carmelo Pampolonio?
Here.
Thank you. Jessica Thomason?
Here.
And Jeff Santiago? Not here. Okay. And also acknowledging Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good afternoon.
Yep. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us again today. So also with us today are several staff members, myself, Grania, and Daniel Oropesa, who's our noise compliance officer, Haley Mahoney, who puts all of this together for us. Thank you, Haley, as always, and our DSD director, Ben Waddy. So if you guys want to just say hi. So I'm going to jump right in, and the first item on our agenda today is the approval of the minutes from our meeting, our December meeting. Is there any discussion of the minutes? And our Haley sent out the minutes last week. Does anyone have any discussion or commentary? Okay. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Corbin?
Yes.
Do I have a second for that?
I second. Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call again for approving the minutes. Charlie?
Yes.
Thank you. Rick?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Anoop is not here. Carmelo?
Yes.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yes.
Thank you. And Jeff is not here. Okay, so based on that roll call, the minutes are approved for our December 13th meeting. So moving along, the next item on the agenda is to elect the chair and vice chair. And I know at our previous meeting, or our first meeting, we decided to just leave that until this meeting. It was really just an introductory meeting and allowing everybody to get to know each other a little bit. So Before I open up the floor to discussion, I do want to just go over the duties of the chair really briefly, and then I'll open up the discussion. If we do manage to appoint a chair today, at that point, I'm going to hand that meeting over to that person. But as we said, we've already shared that little script, so we can certainly work through the rest of the meeting with help. So the chairperson presides over all meetings of the board and ensures that the work of the board is accomplished. To this end, the chairperson must exert sufficient control of the meeting to eliminate irrelevant, repetitious, or otherwise unproductive discussion. At the time, the chairperson must ensure that all viewpoints, at the same time, the chairperson must ensure that all viewpoints are heard and considered in a fair and impartial manner. The chair cannot make rules related to the conduct of meetings or board procedure without the approval of the full board. The chair will appoint board members to temporary subcommittees with the approval of the full board. The chair approves the agenda discussion prior to the distribution of that agenda to the board, prepares the annual report for the board each year, and signs correspondence and represents the board before City Council with the formal approval of the board by motion and vote. The chair or a quorum of the board may call a special meeting. The chair may also cancel any regular meeting. So I don't want to repeat that all over again. Obviously, the vice chair would have those same functions in the chair's absence. So important business for the board to have a chair. So I guess at this point, I would just like to ask, are there any nominations at this point for the chairperson?
I nominate Jessica.
Okay, Jessica.
Yeah, that was my nomination last week.
Okay. So can we have a roll call on the nominations? Is that where we need to go next? I don't think I need a.
Yeah, Grania, this is Ben. As long as there are no additional nominations, then you can move forward with the roll call.
Okay. So I will go ahead and we're going to have a roll call for the nomination of Jessica Thompson as the chairperson. Charlie Beck.
Yes.
Rick Freeman.
Yes.
Corbin.
Yes.
Anoop not here. Carmelo.
Yes, if Jessica consents to that.
Jeff Santiago. Okay. And I do I need to ask you, Jessica?
Yes, I'll accept.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, congratulations. You have a chairperson. Very exciting. Thank you, Jessica. Are you able to access that agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Are you okay with that to go through that? If you're unsure of anything, just we're all novices at this function of the meeting of running these. So feel free to just ask for help. We'll jump in. But okay. Congratulations. Staff very much look forward to working with you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to say, as long as everyone just bears with me with, the rules and procedures that I'm sure I'm going to have a little bit of a stumbling block with some of that. So please be patient with me, but I'm happy to serve.
Thank you.
Which means now we need to have a call for nominations for a vice chair. Is that correct, Grania?
Correct. Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah, all right. Woo.
First pass, you nailed it. Nice work. Yes, so nominations for the vice.
Okay, so now I'll call. Is there any nominations for the vice chair? If not, then do we go through and ask everybody to, what do we do next if there's no nominations?
I'll help everybody out. I'll nominate myself to give you a hand, Jessica.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. So then, so now we go through, and so Charlie, do you agree to Rick Freeman as vice chair?
Yes.
Corbin, do you agree to Rick Freeman as vice chair?
Yes.
Okay. Carmelo, do you agree to Rick Freeman as vice chair?
Yes.
And I also agree to Rick Freeman as vice chair. So we have a quorum. So now we have Rick Freeman. Congratulations as being the vice chair of the Noise Advisory Board.
Congratulations, Rick.
And I look forward to working with you on that.
As we have before.
As we have before. I feel confident that we can definitely work together on this. So, okay, great. And so then the next part of the agenda is the staff report. Is that correct?
Right, that is correct.
And Daniel, you're going to give us an overview of that?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. Congratulations, both of you. And I believe Haley did send everyone a staff report, correct? Okay, so ideally we did set this up in this past week in terms of a format that would be easier to review and explain without too much detail, but giving us the meat of what's happening. If anyone has any suggestions or recommendations, we're open to see what would be easier. But right now, I think this format has been used with other boards. It just makes it easier as to what are goals, complaints, trends, a quick synopsis, which is on the slide, and as well as just a little more detail on the printout that you have. Just for the last month or so, this report is pretty much from the last time that we met, which when we ended our stats. So it starts on December 7th and it ended on Friday. So these are just some of the numbers that we came up with that we tallied up. Some of our initial goals, starting from the top, pretty much one of our top goals is to reduce the amount of calls that go to APD. And with this, we're noticing that this is pretty much, it's a habitual response. And I'm sorry if I'm not looking at the screen, is that the mic is behind me, so I'm trying to make sure everyone can hear me. Reducing calls to APD, we're just realizing that it is a habitual response with so many years of, if there's a problem, call the police. For any little thing, call the police, call the police. So it's we're noticing it is a paradigm shift for people to be calling our agency. We're finding that it's working successfully, which is really nice, but it's a work in progress. It's not everyone can really understand it immediately that you just don't call the police for everything. We are noticing in some of the reports when police do respond that APD they are educating the public in terms of giving them our information. We're noticing a lot of their reports either from the dispatchers or from the officers themselves. It does say contact DSD. They give the email address, noise at. Sometimes they don't give our phone numbers because they don't have that, but just the fact that it goes to noise at is a good thing because 3 of us at least get that email. And that way everyone's always, if I'm out for some reason, Rania can get it or Haley, one of us gets that email and we can respond to it. Every single APD call that comes in, the majority of them we are responding to. We'll talk about a little later about New Year's Eve. Every single call that we get in the morning log, we actually do a follow-up call of saying we have to explain why we got their number, how we got their number, and why we're calling. And that's been working out really good. One of the goals that we also had was ordinance compliance, which one of those, and just for the past month, getting in contact with property owners, apartment complex managers, education, collaboration to resolve matters internally have shown a successful rate. So two of the main goals that we had for the last month, which was reduce APD calls and ordinance compliance, we've had a very good success with. Trends that we're seeing. I'm still on the same slide. Trends that we're seeing, multifamily complaints. This time for some reason, in just the last month, we had 32 multifamily complaints. These are all coming from apartment complexes. So they're not individual single family homes or anything. It's mostly large apartment rental companies that we're working with. Because of that, we are seeing that trend. We have been working since October, since I joined on, new management relationships. We've actually built 21 relationships with property managers that have never even heard of DSD, let alone that there's a noise compliance team. They almost fall off their chair when we're calling them. as well as the HACA properties. That's been extremely successful. We got in touch with the higher ups at HACA. We got individual introductions with all the property managers, and within 48 hours, every single property manager responded, looking forward to meeting us, because we do get a fair share of HACA complaints that are now being resolved internally. And now it's either a phone call or a text or a quick email, and their response is, "I'm on it. I'll find out what happened." And we never hear from it again, which is nice. That to us is a success. Another trend we're seeing is no violations at this time. What does that mean? Two examples, for example, to bring to the table are, for example, waste haulers. Somebody will call in the central downtown business area. They're calling to complain because they're mad at the waste haulers picking up at 6 o'clock in the morning. But unfortunately, and they even sometimes send us a video or a picture of the waste hauler picking up at 6 o'clock in the morning. But unfortunately, the waste hauler is allowed to pick up at that time. So it's more of a frustration or a gripe of that they're picking up at a certain time. But unfortunately, for us to enforce something, we can enforce what we have. And it's a difficult conversation to let them know that there is no violation. They might be disturbed by the noise, but they are in compliance. So in just the last 4 months, we've had 4 no violations at this time, and we have closed those cases. If once again we do receive another complaint on a noise, we always reopen a new case. But if the alleged violator is in compliance, there's really not much we can do. New Year's Eve skewed our numbers. There were 19 complaints between December 31st and January 1st. So that really skews our numbers. A lot of those were one-offs, of someone who's having a party. It's a universal event, and there's not a lot we can do. Interestingly enough, there were, I think just maybe one APD complaint that came in that was an address we were familiar with, but all of them were all new addresses. And ever since we've been keeping very good records, those addresses have never come up. Warning to citation. The last time we spoke, we had one of the warnings that was in our database actually turned into a citation. After a while, we can speak to somebody, we can warn somebody, we can do the formal route of saying, now this is public record. It finally gets to be a citation. And actually, based on that as well, same thing with warnings. Since our last meeting, we had 2 warnings issued, and it takes time. Something we're going to discuss later as to how it takes time and steps. Somebody once questioned, why it took a month to issue a citation. Well, I'll take the waste hauler, for example. Say waste hauler, the waste gets picked up on Wednesday, and somebody calls and complains. That's the first time that's the first time I'm able to get in touch with the waste hauler to say, hey, we have a problem at 123 Main Street. Okay, no problem. It's going to get fixed. World's perfect. Next week, the person calls in and says, hey, or it could be a different person. Hey, I think it is. Sometimes the information is a little skewed. We've all agreed that for the first 6 months or so, we're going to take our time to make sure that everyone understands the ordinance. So week 1, we get a complaint. Week 2, we're like, hey, we're speaking to you, letting you know this is happening. You have to fix it. Week 3, remember, waste at some locations, waste only gets picked up once a week. So week 3, okay, now you got a formal warning, which is public record. And then week 4, when the same person or another person calls in on the same address, is when we can issue the citation. So that clarifies a lot of when somebody asks sometimes why certain citations take a while to issue. And waste hauler is a perfect example, because I only get once a week opportunity to respond to it. Before I go to the next slide, I only have 2 slides on stats. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I do on that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
On the example you just gave, if the second person hadn't called and complained about the waste hauler, would it then have not proceeded?
It could be, for one complaint, it could be the same person or two different people. It doesn't have to be the same person. It has to be the same address. It's the same issue location.
So Rick, if we didn't have a second complaint, but 3 weeks from the first complaint, we got a second complaint, that's still the linear pattern of that. So if we got a complaint in the first week of January and we reached out to the waste hauler and said, we always email, we screenshot the zoning map which shows that they're within 100 feet of a residential zoning district. We circle the building that the complaint is about. We email that to them. We ask them to, please, we're advising that we've received a complaint on this. We appreciate your immediate attention to the matter. If we don't hear anything for 4 weeks on that, and then we hear back on week 5, that then becomes our second contact. It doesn't start over. Is that what you're asking?
Well, sort of. I wonder if the complaining party understands that maybe the way the system is set up, they need to keep complaining.
Yes, we explain that
Oh, we
to them.
do explain that.
We do explain to them that if we don't hear from them, that it is complaint-based. We always, Rick, when we reach out to them, whether our first step is to reach out to them before we reach out to the waste hauler, but we would always reach out to them to get additional information, ask them, what time this has happened, verify their address. So we're actually making sure that they are within that 100 feet of the residential zoning district. And then we will always ask them, we will always let them know, I'm going to reach out to the waste hauler today. If this happens again next Tuesday, please call me back or text me or email me. Unfortunately, we rely on you giving us that information in order to move this forward. So yes, we do explain that to them, but it is an important distinction is that if we don't hear from them, but we hear from them 3 weeks later, we don't start over again with the
process.
With the process. That's actually a continuum. So if we hear on June 1st and we don't hear again until July 2nd, that will still be our second contact to that service provider of a situation where they're not in compliance with the ordinance.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yep. I have one more. When you get no violations at this time, are you tracking what element of the ordinance that complaint is against? I guess what I'm thinking is 2 things. If the downtown folks don't know that guys can pick up trash at 5 o'clock in the morning and they keep on complaining, then A, there's a focused education at the downtown folks that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, it's in some way, it's disagreeing with what the ordinance contains. And I don't know which it is in this case, but it seems like anytime somebody makes a complaint and there's a very clear reason, such as the example you gave, we should be putting that in a bucket someplace so we can see where the public is either inadequately educated or will keep complaining because they think we got it wrong.
Right. You want to take that? You want me to take that? No? Okay. So, Rick, we do in our notes, we will say what the complaint was. We will tell that person. We're not just going to say, sorry, there's no violation. We're going to explain to that person under the ordinance, these are the times that apply to the CBD area. And so at this time, if the waste hauler is picking up between these hours and these hours, then we don't have a violation. However, if they were to pick up before these hours, please circle back to us and we will certainly reach out to them on your behalf. But at this time, what they're doing is in compliance. So we are recording that, and I guess there is a way for us to track it because we can search our database as to complaints we've had on waste haulers in CBD. We can certainly be able to track that. We're not actively tracking it now. It's all in that one database. Ben.
Thanks, Grania. And Rick, I'm just going to add a little bit. So all the complaints that come in go into a very complex Google sheet, something that I could not personally create, but we have staff that can do that. And that Google sheet, Rick, it feeds into the dashboard, which I just put a link to that app in the chat. And for the public watching, if you go to the Noise Board's Advisory Board's webpage, you can see a link to the dashboard. And so you can see on that dashboard, there's buckets of complaint types. So of course we can see that there's a trash recycling collection complaint type. and this is probably, I think, Rick, you had asked for some additional discussion on data today, which is a new business agenda item, but I think these are the kind of things we can talk about. So that bucket, Rick, we can correlate that to the closed code. So we can actually take the bucket of trash complaints and see how those are closed. So to answer your question is yes, we can see what trash complaints would also be closed as no violation at this time. And another thing that Grania's I'm gonna steal a little bit of Grania's thunder, but another thing that Grania's working on with Daniel is they're also going to begin to spatially map some of this data. So even these buckets, we're going to be able to put on a map and see. So for example, we could probably have a map where we could filter out the trash, recycling, collection complaints, and then we could see those spatially mapped. So we could see that of the 27, perhaps 25 are downtown. Mm-hmm. Then perhaps of those 25, 4 were not valid. So everything you're asking, Rick, can be done.
Yeah.
It's just we've got to tease out this data in a way that makes sense for the board and for the staff to work together, because we're all on this. What we're all trying to do here is reduce noise, chronic noise in the city. Does that help, Rick? So I think it all can be done. We've just got to put it together, and we're still learning as you are as well.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
I have another question too, is that, so from this dashboard, for instance, from the last meeting, we had the list of all of the complaints as well. Is that information that we're also going to be able to have moving forward as well? So for instance, when we see like the warning to citation and the warnings issued, will we be able to know who received who received those citations and warnings?
Not on the public dash, no.
Not on the public dash, okay.
No, because that has a lot of personal information on there. Sometimes within our notes, it has the property owner's cell phone or things like that, so that can't be public.
Is that something that us as a board would be able to see, just in terms of just knowing that information as we're trying to do our part to help mitigate issues?
So I'm going to Ben here. I'm going to step in one more time. So Daniel's right. We as a board and the staff, so us as a group, we don't want to give people's personal identifying information, right? I don't want to publish. If you make a complaint on the neighbor and you fear retribution, I don't want to put your address and your cell phone on the website, right? I think we all agree with that. We want to be very careful. We also don't want to shame businesses. Now, some businesses make a lot of noise and need to be addressed, but there are also businesses, or I'll say noise makers, that aren't actually violating the ordinance. So we want to be careful. Just because you get 27 complaints about your operation doesn't mean you're violating the ordinance. So I don't think we want to shame businesses or noise makers either. So with all that said, what I would suggest, Madam Chair, we've got a new business item for data. I wonder if that's not the appropriate place. Like, let's dig in, and what is the data that we need to give the board so y'all can make good recommendations to City Council? I think we're open to it. We want to be careful with, personal information, shaming, things like that. But I think that would be a great discussion for you 5 to have today, if that's okay.
Yeah, and what I'm really thinking is just back from our conversations, that we've had when we were talking about creating this board. And one of the things that we talked about, if you remember, for instance, Rick, of like ways that we can help. It's not necessarily from a shaming thing, but if and maybe that's up to, DSD to decide when they want to give that information to us, in terms of like, here's something, here's somebody who's a repeat offender, for instance, that maybe we could use, for us, to have some interaction with them, from a board perspective, and I don't know the answer to that. It's just a matter of just, wanting to be helpful as much as possible in terms of helping to mitigate some of those things, especially when we see that it's happening, let's just say repeat offenders, for instance, or like, same thing like Rick was talking about. It's like, if it's the same, if, like you said, Ben, if it's like, there's all of these complaints are all in CBD, and we're seeing that it's like 4 of them are the ones, and, how do we have basically having those conversations with the ones that, that we can address and take care of.
And Jessica, on that note, it's one of the things that we do daily, actually, and it comes up, is we are doing the interaction. We are addressing the issue. It does get to a point where we're slowly making a list of, and it just comes out. It's like, this is something we're going to need to address with the board to see once we hit a brick wall. Now what do we do? Because in most parts we're having a big success rate, but there's already a small list, about 3 to 5, that we're going to slowly bring up in the next few meetings of saying we're stuck.
Right.
What now as a team? How do we now handle this? And then that's what we want to bring to you versus, apartment 405 is making loud noise. That's something you don't have to deal with. That's what we do. But now we're dealing apartment 405. We're stuck. We're in this issue. There's a legal battle over there. Where do we go now to prevent this in the future? So those are the type of things that we do want to bring to the board as a team to see if we can all come up with a solution, but not an individual case.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I will talk a little bit about the data and what we do with the data and how we're looking for trends, and part of what we'll talk about later in that meeting, that other new business agenda item, is just that, your function as the board is to present these items to the city council where there need to be changes or amendments, not to look at individual cases. That's not really a function of the board, but there are going to be places where Daniel and I are unable to either work with somebody to get them in compliance or to be able to resolve an issue. And I without a doubt, we see this group working very much as a team. We're in the field, we're doing the work, we're here, we're taking the phone calls, but where we come against difficult situations that we feel are going to be very hard to resolve and may not be able to be resolved under the current ordinance, we absolutely will bring that data to the board, because that's the role of the board, is to bring that then to city council. I think we just, again, with the individual cases, we need to be careful, because I just want to be careful that, number one, we're keeping the personal identifiable information sacred in that, but also the actual remit of the board is to bring that to council. So I think we just need to bring those items, amendments, policies, things that need to be, that may need to go back to city council for, I think it's revisions or amendments. We absolutely will be bringing those, and that will be in a form of data, Jessica, because that's where we get our information, and that kind of, that information is what allows Daniel and I to strategize each day on what we're going to do, and each quarter on what we're going to do. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in the data section, but yes, absolutely. We will, without a doubt, bring that back to the board for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the clarification.
Just moving forward, just on that note, for example, some of the challenges that are always going to come up, we don't see it disappearing. Vehicle noise and illegal activity. There's an expectation from some citizens that they're going to report something at 1 a.m, and Grania and I are going to come out in green vests and stop traffic and tell them to lower their music or stop the revving of the engines. Or there's also, there's a huge party upstairs. I think they're smoking pot, and I think there's guns. Somehow they expect us to go out at 2 a.m. to do that. So these are situations where it is public education of, our safety, everyone's safety comes first. And these are things that we can intervene in or address at, let alone 2 o'clock in the morning, but 20 people in a house smoking pot allegedly, and they think there's guns. And these are just complaints that leave us baffled as to what the expectation is. And of course, our colleagues over at APD are wonderful, because they do respond to those. Exactly. Things that are working well. We repeated earlier, management, owner involvement. We had 2 isolated cases with people who picked up the drums over the holidays, and it was starting at 6 a.m. Then they wanted they wanted to go drumming at 12. Then midnight, they're still drumming. Of course, they're sending us emails, texts, any way they can find us. And the best thing we did on both cases was we found the actual property owner or property management, which in the cases in the past, the police would come, knock on the door, stop the drumming. Next thing, it still happens the next few days. In this case, once you get a hold of the property owner who says, I didn't know my tenant was doing that, the phones have been quiet because they obviously dealt with it and they said it's been handled. So that's been really good in terms of diving deep and find out who the property owner is. It just makes it a lot easier for us to reach out to them and say, hey, I reached another complaint. And so far, it's been a whole week and we haven't heard of either drummer. So I think things are better. We've had other agency collaborations. We had one difficult case with a bar that was a little crazy every weekend or so. Well, we've had good collaborations with ALE, which is the alcohol law enforcement agency based out of Raleigh. They've been wonderful to work with. Of course, our own internal departments that have helped with zoning and so forth. Those have been great for construction complaints. APD, of course, they've been a wonderful resource with us. They've never given us hesitation on assisting with something. And also, I mentioned earlier, the hacker properties, the actual individual, the hacker properties was great just because we do get a number of multifamily complaints that sometimes come from their properties. And now instead of having to go to so many resources or making so many calls, we can actually go directly to the property manager who now actually is familiar because we've been training the usual suspects, the usual complainants. Sometimes it's neighbor to neighbor disputes, which we can't get involved with. We don't know the whole story behind that, but the manager already knows the story. They've already received the complaints. And in some cases, they've already started some action in terms of how they're gonna resolve it. They can't share that information with us because that is private, and we do respect that. But it's nice knowing that the manager says, I know exactly who you're talking about. I know what the complaint is. I got this. So that's been going really well.
And just to clarify, HACA is the housing authority of the city of Asheville. And so they were very involved with the public outreach that we did in the revision process of this project. We spent a lot of time engaging with tenants at the housing authority properties. This time last year, Haley and I tried to meet with some of the property managers. COVID was really bad. We had it all scheduled and it kind of fell apart. So when the ordinance went into effect on September 15th, I reached back out to the management of the housing authority and said, watch this space. We really want to try and get that relationship back on track. By the nature of a lot of the complaints that come from all multifamily residential scenarios, we simply can't be there in the time. And they all also are best handled internally. That most until the point that they may need some assistance from us. So we got a great result with the management from the housing authority a couple of weeks ago. Got all the email addresses and the explanation of who manages what property, and so we've been in touch with them. Several of them have responded back and said we look forward to meeting with you. So we really are very optimistic that will be a great relationship for us to have. And a lot of these noise issues in multifamily need to be dealt with by the property manager. They need to be internally addressed first before the police are called or before DSD are called. And so that is a huge paradigm shift for us to work on and a huge challenge for us, but we're really going to put a very big effort into that. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in our data business item, but just to let you know what HACA is and what it's the housing authority properties, and that relationship has been really good for over 2 years. We've been working with them. They were very involved in the engagement process for the revisions. So
Rick, you had a question?
Yeah, it was about privacy. Maybe that's not the word you said, but the implication was we couldn't know something because of privacy. Or I can call a property manager, let's just say an apartment complex. I can call the property manager and say, I received a complaint from apartment 401 for whatever. That property manager cannot tell me, oh, that's Mr. Smith. Mm-hmm. They're not, but privacy issues, I can maybe say, I have a Mr. Smith who lives there, apartment 401, and he's made a complaint. Are you familiar with it? They can agree to it, but they can't disclose any information to me. Yeah. So does that also mean that when it turns out that it was apartment 501, that was the source of pounding on the floor, they can tell you it's apartment 501, they just can't tell you who lives there?
We usually give them that information. Well, because we'll know where the alleged noise is coming from. That's no secret. A lot of times we don't have what apartment number the complainant is from. But they'll say, it's apartment 501, it's driving me crazy, make it stop. I can then go to the property manager and say, I have an issue for apartment 501, and the complainant even said, oh, it's Mr. Smith who lives there. Can you verify that information? So they can agree to that because I've already given them that information. But they can't tell me, oh yeah, that's apartment 501, Mr. Smith. I have problems with him. They can't do that. So it's little by little, we get pieces of information, and then that's how we actually build as to sometimes where it's coming from.
Okay,
but most of the times we do know where the alleged noisemaker is, but we don't always know who the complainant is. And even on PD reports, it might just have a phone number, and the first thing I say, I introduce myself, who I am, how I got their information, and I'll say, if you wish to remain anonymous, you can. And then the majority of them do after a while. But now if it comes into the second or third complaint, they'll say, look, my name is Lucy, I live in apartment 203, and 403 is driving me crazy. And that's fine, and then we'll go with that. But we can't pressure anyone, nor are they required to give us their information. They can remain anonymous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, Grania finally touched my last thing. Our outreach goals for this first quarter is having the meetings. Now it's a little slower for other areas of noise complaints. We are having meetings with our complexes in the next couple of months. COVID is not helping, so a lot of this might also be virtual unless we can meet outdoors and the weather holds and it's not freezing cold. Most of the managers now, we have over 20 complexes that do want to match a face to the name. And they've been great to work with. And with some of our venues, we want to start setting up meetings for the venues that we did meet during the fall. We do have some venues in store for setting up appointments to take some decibel readings for them. They want to have either karaoke nights or they'll have music outside. Both parties have been proactive. We've contacted them, they've contacted us. They want to make sure we take decibel readings to make sure they're compliant in their area. So when springtime and summer comes and everyone's outside, we've already worked with them, and we're not reactive to a complaint. We've been proactive with it. And that is my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Daniel.
Does anybody have any questions?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
It's just a side question. Who is it again that actually goes out and takes the decibel readings for a given area?
You're looking at us.
Yeah.
Okay. I just
Combination effort.
Okay, cool.
Anyone else? Great.
Okay, so our next order of business is old business. And the agenda item we have is to get an update from the mission statement working group. So I will let Corbin or Jeff want to field that in terms of the mission statement and where it's at.
Thank you, Jessica. It was pretty much your baby. You put out the first idea, and I got to be honest, it was much more than what I had thought. So I just kind of followed your lead on that, to be honest with you. But I found it pretty beneficial, and I believe that Jeff would agree as well. That
yes,
the mission statement just kind of gets us in the right direction. And the mission statement of the NIB is to evaluate the effectiveness of the revised ordinance regarding noise regulation and related city policies, with the goal of developing recommendations regarding amendments, additions, or deletions. The NAB will also evaluate the effectiveness of enforcement of the ordinance in regards to response times, compliance rates, distribution of complaints, and ensuring equitable outcomes. We will propose long-term objectives for achieving acceptable levels of sound for our business and residential communities, and propose means for implementing such objectives. So essentially, that's it. How does that sound for everybody?
Sounds great.
Haley, should we share that with everyone to be able to actually lay eyes on in terms of in the group here before
Yeah.
asking for a vote for it?
So after today's meeting, I can share with everyone. And if you all want to prepare any feedback or changes, the next meeting, we can make any changes that need to be made and make a final vote on a final draft if y'all feel ready at next meeting. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay. All right. I'll be in touch with everyone then.
Okay, great. That sounds great. And that's the only order of old business that we have. So there's nothing to vote on, correct, for that?
Correct.
For now. Okay. So then we just move on to the new business, which is the data evaluations and purpose that Granier and Rick are going to present.
Sure. Thank you, Jessica. Rick had asked a couple of questions about data evaluation and purpose, and so I wanted to speak to that first. Rick, I'm certainly happy for you to come in. I don't have a whole lot to say at this point, but to maybe just share with the group what your thoughts were on that. I really wanted to just share with the board what data evaluation Daniel and I do daily and what the purposes of that data are for us. So I suppose the obvious thing, and I'm not going to dwell on this because it is obvious, but obviously we get data every morning. We meet every morning. We look at what's come to us through APD, what's come through the web page, what's come through emails, what may have come to us personally through our city email or cell phones. And we evaluate that data basically for our work plan for that day. What are we going to do? Who's going to call this person? Is there something, new? The bigger discussion point on data evaluation is what we look at for in patterns and how those patterns help us target our engagement. Daniel had spoken at the beginning of his staff report. One of the biggest goals we have is to reduce the calls that are coming to APD. That is going to be a hard habit to break. People have done that for years and years and years. And every time we receive an email through that Noise at Asheville email, or every time we receive a complaint through that chat form, we're doing that. We're reducing it. It's going to be piecemeal. It's been, like I say, it's a paradigm shift. I also think when we look at the data, a lot of the reasons there are a couple of reasons people call APD. Number one, they want an immediate response. And secondly, many of them, particularly in multifamily development scenarios and also in single family, people want to remain anonymous. They don't want to, they just want somebody to resolve it. So there is a big educational push that needs to happen there. That is what we use the data for now. So based on what John just showed you, with I think we had 32 multifamily residential complaints for the month of December. Of those 32, 27 of those came through APD. That's nearly 85%. That's a lot. So as he had spoken to earlier a little bit, just what we're doing with that data is, okay, how can we affect change in that regard? And so as you all know, because I know all of you have been involved in this process, music is very seasonal. Noise complaints are seasonal. People are out, people are in. So right now we have, outdoor music is kind of a quiet for us. So we're going to look at the data that's been presented to us from those calls and really take that as our big engagement and education push for the first quarter of this year, because that's when we're going to be able to have the time to do that. So what we're hearing from a lot of people is, well, my property manager told me to call APD. Or from what we're hearing from property managers is, I never knew this was going on. I wish they would have come to me first. So there's a big push there to actually get out in front of these people, get with the property managers, and work with them to explain that these initial complaints, without a doubt, should be coming to them. And then if they're going through their internal processes and they're unable to resolve a problem, then that's certainly where we would come in. Similarly, there's a mirror to the tenant in that situation. If they're repeatedly asking their property manager to assist them with a chronic noise problem and it's not being resolved, again, that's where we would come in. But the first action needs to be between the parties on that property. We've had some very good response back from a lot of the property managers asking, can we have a link to your webpage? Can you send me this? Because we want to send out, a lot of them have like a monthly email blast that they'll send to all their tenants. So what we're trying to do is trickle down the education. So Daniel and I will go and visit with these property managers, explain the ordinance to them. Saying there's an ordinance is one thing. There's clearly a need to explain it to those folks as to how it pertains to them. They don't need to know about decibel levels in the CBD if they're a residentially zoned multifamily, apartment complex. So we need to be really targeted in how we explain these things to them, and what tools we can give them that can help get that information out to their tenants too. So that's going to be a big push for us in the first quarter, and that is totally data driven. That is really from the kind of things that we're seeing day in, day out. A quick example of another thing we did with that last year, sort of October, November time, was we did a big push with the buskers, because the buskers typically leave Asheville in the winter months. And Daniel and I were very diligent about going up to town. It's a short walk for us. So we were probably spending between 3 and 4 hours a week during the day engaging buskers, so that when they come back in the springtime, we know them by name, we know the instruments we play, we know where they're gone for the winter. And our first interaction with them, if there's a noise complaint, is not our first interaction with them. We know them. It's not a confrontational thing. I think that's really, really important. They had a little music festival in November. I went down to it. It was on a Saturday night. It was bone chilling cold. I mean, I cannot tell you how cold it was. But I got to meet 5 or 6 buskers that I've never met before and talk with them and really explain the ordinance to them and how that, this is about finding shared space for everybody. And I think they feel supported. But they also understand that we're trying to find a space for everybody, and when we're in public space, that's really important. So that's kind of an example of an outreach we really focused on before Christmas. That doesn't mean we've drawn a line in that. That's perpetual. It's never, it's always going to be ongoing. But I think relationships we've all determined through this process. The relationships are how we're going to move things forward in this. So the buskers have been the big one. The multifamily residential properties are going to be a very big focus for Daniel and I for this next quarter. And so you can expect that we will be bringing more data back to you as a board on that. I think, the other thing is noise is seasonal. So we need to look at those right now, because we're probably going to be very busy with more outdoor music, bars, restaurants, patios come the summer months. So we're trying to be really strategic and use the data that we have for a purpose. And I really just wanted to speak to you as a board today and let you know that's how we're using our time, being that there are only 2 of us. And when we're not responding to calls, this is what we intend to do. But also, just to kind of give a little bit more dimension to that dashboard, is that for every call you see on there are 2 calls made in response to that, because we are trying to reach the complainant and the property manager or the property owner or the potential noisemaker each time too. So there's a real mirror there. So I would, the dashboard is fine, but it is raw data, and there's a lot more story to every one of those calls. And I know you all know that, but some of the complaints we have, there is argument to wonder whether they are actually really are valid noise complaints too. And we don't make that call. We register them regardless. But there are some things that we hear that we're like.
Can I give an example? So over the holidays, we actually did receive it was a noise complaint that came through APD, where the neighbor actually called the police because the child was crying because the mother took his tablet away.
Yeah.
So maybe it was a Christmas tablet,
Yeah.
but then it took it away.
Disciplinary,
The
yeah.
child had a meltdown.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have children or
Yeah.
nieces or nephews that have a meltdown? But the person called the
Yeah.
police because of that.
So that's registered as an official noise complaint, but there is a debate to be had as to whether that should be or not. So I think that the final thing I would say, just to finish up my little portion of this, is that the multifamily complexes, that definitely there is a trend toward a lot of those going through APD, when we're certainly working to change that and have it come to us, but primarily be resolved internally first. But I think the other trend we're seeing in that is that an awful lot of those are one-offs. We don't see the same apartments coming back. We do see a trend of that, but I would say I don't have an exact number for you today, but it's a small portion of them. So a lot of them are one-off. We had another one that was a complaint about, my neighbor is moving furniture, they're moving into the apartment and it's late at night. Well, we are hoping that they're only going to move into the apartment once. And so this is going to be a one-off. They're not going to move in 4 days in a row. And so a lot of these complaints are one and done. And that's data to have that's of use to us, but it's the chronic ones that we really want to work with. But there is going to be a big outreach and education push with the multifamily property managers in the next 8 weeks. So Rick, I hope that answers a little bit about what you were asking, but I know you want to talk about other things too. So I'm gonna hand it on over to you.
Thanks, Grania.
Sure.
I think that maybe the biggest question for the board is, and I can't quote it, and I failed to look it up and memorize it in advance, but Ben probably can quote it over and again. It's the reduction of chronic noise. There's a phrase like that in the overall goal for this thing, is that we want to have less chronic noise than we currently have. And so I try to think about what data we're getting that would tell us that we are achieving that. And my fear is we're just going to count complaints. We're just going to say, and I know I don't have the numbers in my head. Before the noise ordinance, we were averaging 3,000 complaints a year, and now we're a year in and we're only averaging 2,500 complaints a year. Yahoo, we've done it. But if we're pushing the multifamily folks to intervene, and I might be confused here, so please set me straight. If ultimately the residents of multifamily are going to complain to their management, and their management is going to take action or fail to take action, we're going to have a reduction in complaint numbers, conceivably without a reduction in chronic noise, because we won't know. We won't be counting them anymore. We'll never get those numbers. And so I'm just I'm concerned that we look at the big picture. All the little picture stuff that you guys are doing makes a ton of sense to me, but how do we say to ourselves that chronic noise is actually on the decline? So that's part one. Part two, people have a right to call when noise is damaging their ability to sleep. And they have a right to hope that action would be taken to stop that at that moment in time. And if we weren't, 40% down in APD, maybe, wherever that is headed, since the sleep time is always going to be beyond the working hours of DSD. Maybe we just have to set that problem aside until there is adequate APD support. Because I think if we ended up surveying the public on whether they thought the noise ordinance was effective, and they only ever got called back during business hours on the following day, everybody who complained at night would say that the noise ordinance was ineffective because they want it to stop so they can sleep or their kids can go to sleep, and the next day's a school day and somebody's got to get up early for a test. So trying to move complaints from APD to DSD, maybe that's an interim thing until APD is adequately staffed, but we should have APD here in this meeting once in a while to talk about that, because all I know is when we first convened 30 or 40 people from 20 different neighborhoods, the complaints were about my kids can't sleep. It happens all the time, that sort of stuff. Those people aren't going to care. They're going to feel like we're not doing our job. If by moving complaints to an email address that doesn't get addressed till the following day, that they're never going to be happy. And I think as citizens, they understand APD is down, so we just need to make sure we're not accidentally moving the numbers in a direction that look good for us but don't look good for the public. And then the third thing, which that I think should come up in one of these, and I'm just going to put that under purpose rather than data evaluation, is the policies and standard operating procedures that the team is using. We should have access to those. You guys explain it really well, but then we have to remember it,
Sure.
that this happens and then it's 24 hours later before that happens,
Right.
and those kinds of things, just so that the cycle time of complaint arrival to contact to all that kind of stuff, that, and if there's any grace periods, to give people time to respond, because you can't necessarily expect the business to respond on that day, or maybe you can. I mean, I think you should just give us an introduction to those, and they should be available to us somewhere so we can, when we're confused, we can read the policies and procedures that you guys have invented and are probably modifying as you go along so that we know they're effective.
Rick, I'm happy to share those with the group. And I'm glad you talked about, some of the policies. I know there was a general consensus when the ordinance came into effect that the first 6 months would be, used for education and engagement. And so some of those policies may need to be modified as we go along too, as there's more, as we can say, with some components of the ordinance, that, like we gave the example of the waste hauler. We email once, we email twice, the third time is a written warning, the fourth time is a citation. We may modify those first 2 emails into one after 6 months. I don't know, but we'll certainly, that's again something that we can work with the board with. So those, we're happy to get those to you. And I did want to say at the beginning of Daniel's staff report too, this was a really tight turnaround for us this meeting, but going forward, we'll have that staff report out with the agenda the week before. I apologize we didn't get that to you earlier, but we had 2 really short weeks with the holidays, so we just weren't able to get it to you. But going forward, that will be with the agenda items. The SOPs and policies, we can certainly get those to you too. I would just, as far as APD goes, I don't think that we see that there's not that people should not be able to access APD in the middle of the night. I completely agree that they should. And
Respond.
And they do respond, and that response may increase as numbers increase for them. But what we are looking at is the one-offs that are not necessarily in the middle of the night, or not that these are being explained to tenants when they move in, what the policies are within that particular apartment complex is. So I think we always want folks, and we always do explain that too very carefully, Rick, is that when we ask somebody to call us, if we're responding to a call and we'll say, if this continues, please reach out to us directly. We always qualify that with, if you feel that you're not safe or you feel that somebody else is not safe, please call APD. So we do always qualify with that. There's always going to be a role for APD in this. But you can definitely see that there are some calls that can probably be handled internally, and there are some that won't, and that's never going to go away, and that's fine. That shouldn't. And for people who can't access email or the web, they should be able to file a complaint from their home, absolutely, through APD. So I think it's always there, but I do think that there are certain things that we can respond to and property managers can respond to that can help with that load that APD is getting. Charlie, you had a question?
Well, just kind of a comment. I agree with Rick that the intensity or the impact on a nighttime event. If someone's already irritated over a noise infraction, getting a voicemail that says, "Hey, we'll get back to you tomorrow," they're going to pick up the phone and call APB. I mean, I would be interested data-wise in what number of calls are second calls that are already going, because I think they're critical. I mean, even during this quieter period, and I do believe that COVID has tamped some things down as far as frequency, I can set my watch at 9 o'clock to know that Ben's tune-up is firing up for the night, because I can hear him in my living room. So, it's those sorts of things that, I do believe that this board can go have a dialogue with the owner of Ben's and say, how can you tamp that down a little bit rather than me having to have it compete over my noise canceling earphones. And I do also believe that when the spring comes back and we get to, and I notice outdoor performance venues are a bullet here, that has been obviously in Center City a challenge, but it's not just outdoor venues. I had a pharmacist, a lady that lives right in downtown, and I think she lives next to the Atlanta Music Center or whatever. She said every night except Tuesdays, her walls vibrate. So, it's more than just noise. It's some derivatives of the noise that are causing some inconvenience and nuance to the owner. So those are points. I agree with Rick. I think we have to figure out a way to recommend some mechanisms to try to tamp some of that down in a more holistic manner.
Corbett, you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand what Charlie's saying, but at the same time, where's that line between, a general sense of common sense and should I call the police or not? Should I make that complaint? Because if I'm in a condo downtown right in the center and downtown happens to be full of live music, where do we take what is considered a actual legitimate complaint versus, you're living in the commercial zone, so to speak? Like what, you understand, like the metrics of it, like where is it going to be beneficial for Ben's? I don't see a problem like that being solved, is what I'm saying. Like for instance, going to Ben's and it's like they don't even have a roof on top of their building. So how are we going to contain that? I don't understand the example.
I think Daniel and Grania could probably speak to this a little bit more in detail, but I just know in our experiences that is a bit of a challenge trying to figure out where those lines are. And I think, that might be something the board, will be considering moving forward, is kind of how we can get more clear-cut ways to kind of find, because downtown it's a decibel. We're on decibels, so something like walls rattling would not be captured underneath the ordinance as currently written. But Grania, Dan, would you like to kind of add on?
Well, yeah, earlier we touched on it a little bit in terms of basically this is a challenge, and it's something that a few months down the line, I mean, the ordinance went into effect in September. So, I mean, what we have now compared to what we'll have September of 2022 is going to be different, because at least now we could make some comparisons within the last year. And in 2 years, you'll have great data because you can compare 1 year to the next. Is it COVID? Is it seasonal? We don't know. But one of the Ben's has been mentioned. I've actually gone out to Ben's for a complaint where I've actually taken decibel levels at Ben's and there was no violation. Doesn't mean that the person who complained wasn't disturbed by the noise. What's a disturbance to me is different to Grania. But if my data is showing that, hey, they're not in violation, that's a tough conversation I have to have with the complainant. If they are in violation, it's an issue that I can go to the bar and say, hey, who's the owner? These are the complaints I'm receiving. How can we work together? Once they're in compliance, but the complainant is still complaining, that is a challenge we're going to bring to the board of saying, how do we resolve this? Yeah. The complainant or complainants, plural, are still complaining over ABC bar, without mentioning any bar. How do we handle this? Yeah. They're not in violation, but the citizens are still bothered. We're stuck. Mm-hmm. What do we do? And that's where we are. That will definitely be a challenge of, that's a tough conversation to have with the complainant. And of course it's our fault. I'm not doing my job. And I'm like, I can only enforce what law I have to enforce, what ordinance. So if that seems to not be working, then that's something that we're going to come to you.
We will bring that back to the board for certain. When we come out, and I'm not just saying it's going to be music, whatever the situation is where it's difficult to resolve it or it's difficult to enforce it. But we do really try and, again, have a conversation. Daniel and I are going out on Thursday night to a venue that's got some music. I had a couple of complaints about it. I've called the owner. I've asked him if he would like us to come out and just take some decibel readings for him, get him to where he's compliant. If he even is in violation, he may not be at all. And I just said, we'd like to come out, help you out, get you to a point where you're fine and you're in compliance. But I also had to have that conversation with the complainant and let him know that if we go out and take decibel readings on Thursday night and this bar is at 68 decibels, he is in compliance with the ordinance and there is no more we can do on that. So I think we talked a little earlier about mirroring and duplicity. We have to, we can't, I can't change the ordinance because this person is complaining. We'd certainly come out and do our due diligence and do our field work. But if we come back with a decibel reading that is in compliance, then that is what we have. And so we have to have the conversations with both parties on that one.
I know that Rick and Charlie both have their hands raised, and I just want to say quickly just on that is I feel like that's part of why we're here is to figure this out, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's we're going to be met with these challenges and repeat offenders and also people who are repeat complainers while in compliance. And, I feel like that's one of the things that we're going to have to work really hard to do is find that balance of how do we, because there's going to be times where somebody is not going to be happy on one side or the other. So how do we do our best to mitigate that as much as possible? Charlie, you had your hand up, so I wanted to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree, with Corbin, the establishments that are here, they're downtown, they're here, and they can't go away. So I think that, my mechanisms of the way I thought about this is that I know we keep concentrating on decibel levels, but also we need to look at, impact and duration and frequency. Because if we hear this every night, then there's going to be people complaining every day, particularly if they're loud ones. And my personal viewpoint is I have a particular aversion to the 85 decibel exceedance. I think we defeat the purpose of a noise ordinance by basically saying, oh, well, we can open the valve up and you can go to 85. I don't know if you've experienced 85. I imagine, Jessica, you have in recording, and Carmela, but it shakes my windows when it gets to 85, and I'm 550 feet away from the nearest venue. So, from that standpoint, I'm pretty much of a mindset, if we can look at it holistically and say, can I move some levers, to get to that balance that we all said at the outset we wanted to get to, then fine. It ain't going to be perfect for anybody. And then we can explain that to the public that, hey, we came, we saw, and we did the best we could with what we had to deal with.
Thank you. That's good points. Rick, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I think one of the, going back to data evaluation, that I will connect to this in a second, the time between a complaint and a measurement is a piece of data we should be keeping, because not all noise sources produce the same decibels of noise under all circumstances all the time. So, I don't personally experience much of this, except the one time I went down to Charlie's deck to listen to what was coming out of a music venue. And I got there for the main act that I shall not repeat who it was. And people were saying, well, gee, we would have thought the main act would have been the loud one, but it turns out that the lead-in band was substantially louder. So I think we have this problem because of staffing and timing and all that stuff, that when it's a circumstance where it's a resident complaining about the noise coming out of a commercial space, if we are incapable of getting there quickly to take the measurement, then we're just always going to have questions from the complainant that says, well, of course, you can get here to an hour later and the band was done, or the hospital turned down their air conditioning thing because it cooled down at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So to me, this comes back to the expectation of the public and the limited resources of APD. And I think we as a board have a responsibility to just be straight with when and if we'll ever see a response time to actually catch the noise source in the act, or whether we're forever going to be hours or the next day. And I just think people still have an expectation that when they're mad enough to pick up a phone and call and make a complaint, that someone's going to do something soon. And we're going to have a public relations challenge to explain when that's actually possible under the staffing constraints. And if I look at the objective of the board, if APD could never get there, this is just a made up scenario, APD could never get there, and DSD doesn't have the money or the staffing to fulfill a 24/7 response team, then we should be telling city council that this isn't going to work. We wrote an ordinance and it's got a bunch of stuff in it that should be good, that we could work against and figure out what's possible, but we can never get to the source of a complaint in a timely fashion in order to know what's going on. I think that's one of my concerns about enforcement, is we're under a bunch of constraints between COVID and what happened to all the police department, and that there's basically two people in Ben's team and they can't work. Somebody can't work 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and the other person we work 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. It's just not practical.
Rick, I agree with you. And I think that maybe, as we continue to get this data, that may be something that we go to city council with if we see that this is an issue, because this is something that we've talked about and been concerned with from the beginning of being able to really get this true data. And it may be one of those things where we do end up after 6 months going to city council and say, there's got to be some sort of budget included for DSD that has somebody that is actually able to be present and accountable to do these tracking of decibel levels from 8 p.m. till 12 or something of that sort. So I agree with you. I think part of it is just going to be that may be something as part of our role as making those recommendations. We may have to go and say, this is something you're going to have to find a budget for if this is going to work.
Or counter, we can't possibly evaluate the effectiveness of enforcement
Right.
until APD achieves 95% staffing, and
Right.
that conversation we need, in my opinion, we need APD representative to, just tell us what they believe is real and what their current projection for higher back is and all that kind of stuff. But I know from talking to Ben in the beginning, you can't just have a staff of 3 that, is 3 8-hour shifts. Trying to carry on a 24/7 thing is a big commitment. And since there are other enforcement things that conceivably go beyond the normal times, like animal noise and things like that too, I don't know. I'd turn to DSD if we find this is a continual problem and ask them for their recommendation.
Yeah, I think once we have some more data and we see if there's some trends happening towards that, then maybe we bring that back up to DSD, for instance, and especially if we see it's continually habitual with a certain business owners or properties or things like that, that we say, can there be some considerations made so that Daniel, instead of, can you make sure that, can you be available on these Friday nights that we're seeing this repetitive thing to be able to take these measurements? Is there some way and some considerations that we can make that happen? I feel confident as a group that we'll as these different things, from seeing the data and what we're seeing, that we should be able to find ways that we can appropriately track these things. And then again, if not, then go to city council and say, we're not really going to be able to get this figured out and really serving the community until we're able to fulfill this role of this person doing this at these times. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I will just say that we do, and we have, and we will continue to go out on targeted evenings when we know there's a music venue or there's, a concert or something. We've done it. Daniel and I were out last weekend. It was more of an industrial noise. Or last Tuesday, we'll be going out this Thursday. So we are doing that. It's not something we can do every night of the week. And
Right.
I also like to add to that, we may have a music venue that on that particular night is in compliance, but a different genre of music or, a different time of year, they may not be. And so that's a frustration, and it's a consideration for sure that we need to have a look at. But please know that we are going out. I've been out many nights at 12:30 and 1 o'clock in the morning and taking readings at some venues. So we are doing it. It's just not something. We have to be strategic about where we put ourselves. And when we're looking at something like that, then what are we doing with, the apartment calls or the single family home residential calls? So we have to be strategic, and that's just a numbers requirement. But we have done that to date, and we just can't do it every night, obviously.
Absolutely. And I completely understand, Granier, and I think that's great that you're doing it. And I think, again, just to say that I think, as we're seeing that data and you're making those decisions on when you're doing that based on where you're seeing those trends, right, you need to be doing that, I think is helpful to know moving forward that yes, we're not just stuck in this 9 to 5 time frame. No. So if there's not any other comments on that, I just want to move forward to Ben, Woody, and Chris Collins about the outdoor performance venues, which was the other thing that we had on this new business for today's meeting.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And real quickly, I want to read, I don't want to go back necessarily, but I did hear, I think on that last agenda item, what I think I heard was the board wants to see, I guess, in writing, like I appreciate you, Rick, saying that we say it really well because we do this every day, but I think you want to see more of our enforcement policies in a written format. I believe that's what I heard you say.
Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of data, we've got a dashboard feed. Maybe this is continue to the next item, but if that needs to have more types of data or different variations of data, you have to kind of let us know. because again, we're happy to try. This is transparent. There's nothing, we want to feed you the data you need to help you meet your goals as a board. So I just want to leave you with that. And with that, Daniel, if we can bring up the one slide I have for outdoor performance theaters or centers. So Chris is not here today. Chris is in the technical review committee, so he's dealing with a bunch of large development projects right now. But I don't have, this is a very high level overview. So one thing that we did is we went through this process, the outdoor performance venues, got a lot of discussion, as many of you know, because you did it with me. So we were in many of those meetings together. And one of the things that we told City Council was that after the ordinance was adopted, and we had time to get some data, primarily noise measurements. We wanted to have decibel level data and to evaluate the impacts of the outdoor performance centers. And for those that don't know, those are businesses that are permitted to have, it doesn't have to be music, it can be cultural arts performances, so it can be theater, it can be music, it can be a number of things. And in particular, the ones that are outdoors, because obviously they have a bigger sound footprint than like an indoor facility would. And so one of the things, quite frankly, that we've always been straightforward about is it's really, there are very few zoning standards about how you can permit an outdoor performance center. So it's actually relatively, I'm not going to say easy to permit, but it's certainly, there's a lot of places that these outdoor performance centers can be located. And from the zoning ordinance, there's really no analysis of how they may impact adjoining properties, residential, et cetera. So one thing that we told council and the community is that we would work with the noise board to evaluate those standards and make sure that we're allowing outdoor performance venues in locations that make sense for Asheville. And so this is the first breach of that conversation with the board. Chris Collins is the lead on this. We don't have an amendment, so we don't have rules written up. We have some drafts, but we do want to share those with this board, but we're not prepared today. But what I wanted to do was just give you a quick overview of kind of what we're thinking in terms of what needs to be evaluated. So the first thing really is kind of where do we allow outdoor performance centers? And just to give I just to give an example, I think you guys probably know this, but like venues like Rabbit or Salvage Station, those are the types of venues that are outdoor performance venues, or others that I'm probably not remembering offhand. The stage in downtown Impact Square Park would be one as well. So there's a number of those in the city. So the question is, where are those allowed? What zoning districts? What makes sense? Another element is, and when I say dimensional standards, should there be setbacks or buffers from residential areas? Should there be requirements that the speakers face away from the residential areas? Things that I think are pretty straightforward, but what of those should be included in the zoning ordinance, which is what allows these to be located? Another thing is, to what extent do they have to, do sound impact planning or sound analysis or things like that? So again, when they're citing these facilities, what are we asking these venues to do before we permit them to be constructed and used? One thing that's, I think, really interesting and probably will be really challenging for this board, quite frankly, is we have what I would call a primary use. So it's a place that's built, its sole purpose primarily is to host outdoor performance events. So that's pretty straightforward. Really what we've seen, which I think is a product of COVID probably, I think whenever COVID was really at its worst, perhaps it still is, but when it certainly was, a lot of businesses moved their operations outdoors to be safer, and that made a lot of sense, and we were flexible with that, the city was. But one thing is a lot of places have begun reinventing these outdoor spaces, and you're beginning to see what I would call as kind of accessory outdoor performance venues that are popping up. And that is maybe most of the time you're a retail shop or a brewery or whatever, a restaurant, whatever it may be, but you're beginning to have outdoor performances more frequently. So that's something probably to think about. And lastly, with any of this, we always have to be aware of if we create a new set of standards, we certainly want to evaluate what, if any, impact that has on the existing outdoor performance centers, so the places that are already permitted. So all the breadth of that is really zoning related, which isn't necessarily, the direction of this board. You come at this more from the sound ordinance, which the sound ordinance is what it is. Regardless of where these things are built, they've got to meet the sound ordinance. So that's one thing I want to say and be clear about. But this is a question of when they are going to be built, what makes sense and where should they be. And I do think, particularly in terms of maybe sound impact planning or impact on residential areas, sound impact, I think this board will be a great resource for that conversation. And the last thing is, the way this would work is we want to get the noise board to take a look at this. And we'll have more details at your next meeting and give you a chance to comment and give some feedback. Eventually, any changes to the zoning ordinance would go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation, and then it would eventually end up at City Council. So I think we've got some work to do before we get there, but we just wanted to kind of put this on your radar. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, assure you that we'll be back next meeting with more information on this.
Rick, you have a question?
I don't even know if this question makes sense. Has anybody applied to become one of these at this point in time? Set the accessory ones apart for a moment, but is there?
I am not aware of any applications. Are you, Grania?
No.
No. So they have. It is. To be clear, and I say this against my own department, it is not easy to get permits for some things in Asheville. So no, we have not had anybody apply for one of these as of yet.
No.
Okay, that would just, I only ask because that would maybe give us a sense of urgency, right? If we got time to debate this, because there's nobody whose business model is depending on doing something like this that is going to go through and hammer it out without us, then we can be thoughtful and fit it into meetings that only happen every 30 days. So that sounds good.
Ben, can I ask a question out of curiosity? So take the Hazel Robinson Amphitheater. So I'm not sure is that a city owned property?
That amphitheater is on city property and owned by the city, correct?
Okay, then that answers my question. So just in terms of, because I know that there was some shows done there this season, and I know that it's booked out by different promoters, for instance. So, but I also know that they have to go through the process of getting permitted by the city then to be able to use that space. So that was
that's correct. And again, there are, again, when you see that the nonconformities bullet, just because you're the city doesn't mean necessarily that you don't have to meet zoning, because you do. So there's also some challenges with that property because in fact it's zoned residential, and we're actually actively meeting with the sub-lessees of that property to discuss the use of that amphitheater.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions from the board on the outdoor performance venues that Ben just shared with us? No? Okay, well then we will check in now with Haley Maloney for public comment.
Let me just check. We did not receive any comments prior to the meeting, and there is no one on the line for public comments, so we can glance over for today.
There's nothing else. Anything else from the board before we make a motion to adjourn this meeting? No? Okay, so we will adjourn this meeting. Are there any objections?
No.
All right, then hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.
Well done, Chairwoman.
Thank you.
So Rick and Jessica, if y'all can stay on just for a minute.
Well done indeed. Thank you.
Yeah. Good job, everybody.
Thank you. And our next meeting is February 14th, everyone. So put that on your calendars.
Bring your Valentines.
Same time and place.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I'll expect festive Valentine's wear.
Yeah.
Did you say for us to stay on, Ben, me and Rick?
Yeah, Rick, and if you
sure.
We'll just have Daniel cut the live stream so we can end the meeting, and I'll cut the public input. So everyone have a great day, and I'll be in